This is the podcast for Narrate Church. Narrate Church meets every Sunday at 9 and 11 a.m. at the Grand Street Theater in Helena, Montana. For more information, visit www.narratechurch.org.
So what do you want to talk about? Good job, you guys. We laugh, but don't we laugh because love is so profoundly frustrating. Love and sex both. And yet, can you think of something? Can you think of a human desire more difficult to rein in? It's kind of why we're going there. Like, can you think of a human desire more capable of destruction, more capable of obliterating marriage vows, religious commitments, career goals, family commitments, and anything else that gets in its path, right? I think that's why, that the power of love, the power of sexuality, it's why that once again in 2013, experts say that the combined revenue of the NHL, which they don't make much money because they don't play, the NBA, the NFL, and Major League Baseball won't touch the revenue in our country of pornography. Far more money made by the porn industry than the four major sports leagues combined. It's why the power of love and sexuality is why that statistically speaking, not pointing any fingers, 3 out of the 4 men in this room will look at pornography at least once in January, and again in February, and again in March. And ladies, lest you think that's a male issue, conservative numbers say that it's 1 in 4 among women, and some argue that it's more like 1 in 3, and pornography is growing faster among women than it is among men right now today. Now, that's not really where we're going this morning. You'll be relieved to know that. We're saving that for Super Bowl Sunday, and we're going to talk real extensively about sexual addiction and how as parents we can help our kids avoid sexual addiction, and how as individuals we can put good avoidance and treatment and all those different things. So that February, like the 5th or something like that. This morning, if you're a guest of this, welcome. We're thrilled that you're here. We recognize it's a little bit of a weird weekend for you to be with us because we're starting this series called It's About More. And yet, as you heard Caleb say just a little bit ago, like, we're a church that wants to matter. We're a church that strives to not just play the religious game, to not just like show up and have Jesus pat us on the butt and say, let's meet in heaven, but to really be transformed by him. And that doesn't mean that we're trying to create this culture where we all have to pretend to be perfect, but where we all are striving to be different because of his grace. And yet also, we want to matter. We don't want to do church unless it creates tangible benefit in our community. And so that's really why we're starting this series this morning called It's About More. Because I can't think of a topic that's more pertinent to our culture. Can you? One that has more power, that obliterates more relationships. It's been a fascinating few weeks. We've obviously kind of tried to tease like, hey, here's the series we're going to start in January. And it's been interesting. Some of my closest friends and some of my loudest critics have all engaged me on, what the heck are you doing? Some of you, it's gone something like this. Those of you that, we have a relationship, I love you, you love me. It's gone something like, okay, so Adam, what exactly are we going to talk about? Sex. Really? And for some of you, it's because you have friends that are coming with you, and I get that, and I appreciate that, and I think it's your right to go like, you're not going to suddenly embarrass me. You're not going to suddenly embarrass them, are you? And we're not. Mid-February, you'll be disappointed because It's About More is a sex series, but only kind of. It's also not a sex therapy series, and I don't expect you to admit that that's disappointing, though I know that deep down it will be disappointing to you. It's a series that suggests that sex is about more. Now, one gal approached me after, I think it was the Sunday before Christmas Eve Sunday, and she approached me, and we knew that this was kind of edgy. We knew like the tally marks on the headboard. We knew some of that stuff was like, eh. And so she came up to me and she said, hey, Adam, and she had this very kind of stern look on her face. Hey, Adam, I think we need to change the name of that series in January. Okay, and I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, here we go. I mean, this is right. Yep, okay. She said, after, I can't remember what it was, like 30 years of marriage, I think it should be called Less is More. Hey, I'll let that one sink in a little bit. Some have gone so far as to suggest that there's no place for this in church. What is the church doing talking about sexuality? Is it just another attractional technique to get people to come here because we're going to say what people want to hear? To which I would say, why was Jesus so surrounded by prostitutes? Why is sex and sexual sin such a prevalent issue in the Gospels? And why was some of his best work, if you will, some of his closest friendships, why were they created in sexual, sorry, I screwed up that sentence. Why was some of the people he got the closest to, why were they coming out of sexual issues? Do we think Jesus is relevant to the 21st century? Do we think that he's more than just a guru, that he's relevant to the everyday life that we're trying to live? Do we think that his words transcend all cultures and all times and in all places? And if that's the case, if he's really the very best way to live, love Dallas Willard when he's asked, why do you follow Jesus? And he says, who else do you have in mind? Like if we really think he's the best candidate to lead us through life, then can you think of a more important topic? Would he really have us avoid the topic entirely? I did a little scan this week. Jesus addresses sexual issues in the Gospels 17 times. In the New Testament, which is the writings of the early church after Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, the word sexual in the TNAV shows up 27 times. In the Old Testament, what we would call the Old Testament, what the Jews would call the Tanakh or the Hebrew Bible, there's these 10 commands. Remember them? Second book of the Bible, 10 commands. How many of them deal directly with sexuality? Like, I hadn't even thought of that until this week as I was kind of trying to prepare my thoughts and go like, holy cow, there's 10 commands. 2 of them address sexuality. There's 39 books in the Old Testament, 66 in the Bible, 39 in the New Testament. One of them, one of 39, is all about sex. I mean, it's like the book that when the junior high pastor says, hey, students, go read your Bible, it's like, but don't read Song of Solomon, because it'll just be frustrating. Because it's this profoundly sexual book, is it not? And some would even go so far as to say, like, well, yeah, but it's all metaphor about the church and Jesus and their love. And okay, even if we grant you that, what I think somewhat off view, the illustrations are still about 2 young lovers. And the illustrations are quite erotic. So yes, it's uncomfortable. I think we can all agree on that. But is it also essential? I think that's really the design of this next 5 weeks. Really what I want to do over the next 5 weeks is, over the next 5 weeks we're going to talk about It's About More. What I want to do this morning is, some have suggested, I'm indebted this morning to Les Parrott, and I'll reference a book from him later, and Rob Bell, who wrote a great book called Sex God, as well as John Ortberg and others. Some have suggested, I'll use their own words, I've chosen to use Rob Bell's words, that one of the greatest issues that we have when it comes to sexuality is we're prone to 2 extremes, what you might call an angel view of sexuality or an animal view of sexuality. And this morning, to be honest with you, probably this morning we're going to talk more about sex per se than we are in the next several weeks, because this morning I just want to get you thinking about, do you have an angel-like view or an animal-like view? So let's talk about the angel view first. Did you get your cornflakes? Did you all have your cornflakes? How many of you had some version of cornflakes for breakfast this morning? Would you raise your hand? Some of you will never eat them again, and some of you will be buying them by the truckload in just a moment. Did you know that in eating cornflakes, you literally were eating a breakfast cereal that was designed to minimize your sexual desires? It is not a joke. Years ago, a physician in Michigan who was convinced that neither the smallpox, nor the plagues, nor wars had as much negative impact upon culture as had sexual desire and sexuality, that was his bent, that was his theology. He designed, I don't know the science of it, but he designed cornflakes in order to prescribe them to his patients in order that they would desire sex less and thus live holier lives. It's not a joke. He took oatmeal and cornmeal and ground it up and then shaped it into biscuits and then smashed them and then prescribed them to patients, married and single, young and old, in order to encourage them to not desire sex anymore. Why? Because he was convinced that sexuality was the result of, among other things, insanity. To which some of you go, well, he's right. Maybe he has a point. Charles William Post was one of his patients. Post as in the cereal. He was prescribed cornflakes, bought into the thinking, understood the negative impacts of sexuality, and as a result, took them himself and as a savvy businessman recognized the commercial possibilities. And so hence was born what became quite a war among the cornflake world. He started, Post Toasties. Shortly thereafter, there was a brand of cornflakes created called Corn Kinks. Not making this stuff up. There were 42 of them in all. Post Toasties obviously was one of them that won the day. Charles William Post was so bent on this thinking that in fact on his honeymoon, he started writing what became his life work. It took him his life to write it called Warnings to Men and Women, or Warnings to the Young and Old, I think is what it was called. The subtitle being The Dangers and Horrors of Sexuality. Charles William Post was married for 42 years, and in each of those 42 years, he and his wife slept in separate bedrooms. It's an angel mindset. It's a mindset that says sex it's shameful, it's dirty, it's wrong, and therefore we should limit it. And I think we laugh and we smirk and we go, boy, they sure got it wrong. But I think before we do that, it's worthwhile to just look at ourselves and go, are there some angel views in our own thinking? Now, like many of you, I know I'm grateful for my parents. I honor them. I recognize, being now a parent of 3, that parenting is an impossible task and there's no such thing as a perfect parent. And so I don't ask this question to elicit criticism on my part or yours, but how many of you really got the birds and bees talk from your parents? Raise your hand. You're a very shy bunch. For good reason, it's hard, right? Horrible. My wife and I were walking with our boys the summer before last near Mount Ascension, and there was a road that was a dead end, and then it turned into a trail. And so we parked, and we walked up this road, and we quickly found out that other people also park there. And we got to this point in the road, towards the dead end of the road, where there was this pile of paraphernalia. Now, I don't know, our boys were like 3, 5, and 6 or something at the time, and for them it was a treasure. And they went running up to what amounted to a spent condom and a vibrating G-ring, and they were this close to picking them up when we both of us kind of screamed like, "Stop! You can't touch that!" They're like, "What's the deal? It's a balloon. It's a bracelet. It's what?" So they asked, like, "Why? Why can't we touch that?" And I did what any good dad would do. I kept walking. And I left the kids with the RN wife to give an explanation. It's difficult stuff. I remember this week a friend who's actually coming to visit us next week, who was in our youth group. He told me a story in high school about a time where his dad, they lived in Billings, and his dad I think he had season tickets to the Broncos, and one month his dad's like, "Hey, next month you and I were going to go on this road trip to a Broncos game, and we'll hang out, it'll just be the 2 of us in Denver for the weekend." Great. He said, I don't know, he was like in 6th or 7th grade. Okay, sounds good. And then he said they got in the car and they got on I-90, and he put in these 8 hours of tapes from James Dobson and Focus on the Family. It was the sex talk tapes. He was horrified. He was sure to fill in his little sister when he got home, and so he was telling me this story because more recently his mom had said to his sister, "Hey, I was thinking we could go to Spokane and shop for the weekend." To which she said, "Are we going to listen to those tapes?" Her mom's like, "How'd you know?" And she's like, "We talk." Like, that's how this sibling thing works. As a youth pastor, I was a part of many of what we called Pure Love Waits series, these purity series where, 3 or 4 weeks where we talk about sexuality, and it would typically culminate with a ceremony at the end where students would make a commitment to sexual purity, and part of that was that they would get a silver ring and they would sign a piece of paper and they would commit to their parent or a small group leader, like, "I'm going to live a life of purity until I get married." I was horrified this last spring when I was at a conference back east when they told us that studies have been done and there's actually no statistical support for that process. That a high school student who's made that commitment, whether it be in 6th grade or their junior year of high school, they're not any more likely to enter marriage without sexual baggage than is the person who didn't make that commitment. And part of me has to wonder if it's not because guys like me, youth leaders like myself, and us as parents have let them down because we went, "Hey, we talked about it once, we're done. Got that covered." Just kind of, it's too embarrassing. It's tough stuff, but the angel view, it's also dangerous. Can we agree? In Job, just to kind of get your brain on like, okay, where's this angel word coming from? Job says this, if I can get there. Job says that when God created the world, all the angels shouted for joy. In the Psalms, it's written that God made human beings a little lower than the heavenly beings. The book of Hebrews says that an angel is a spirit. So an angel is a spirit without a body. Therefore, an angel has no sex and sexuality and marriage and procreation. It has no place in an angel's life. No relevance whatsoever. What the experts say, I guess what I'm suggesting to you, is when we treat sexuality, when we approach it as people who have spirits but no bodies, we approach it like an angel. We pretend like these desires and this biology, it has absolutely no place. Or worse, we suggest that those desires and that biology is bad, and so we must just minimize it. We must get rid of it. We must not acknowledge it at all. And it turns out this is the very issue that was happening in the first century in the Asia Minor city of Ephesus. That there was a religious cult, essentially, that was struggling with this very same issue. Paul addresses it in 1 Timothy chapter 4. Like you, I have that cold that everyone has, so if I wipe my nose, I'm sorry. The Spirit clearly says that in later times, some will abandon the faith and follow deceiving spirits and things taught by demons. So Paul's saying, like, we're in that time. Such teachings come through hypocritical liars whose consciences have been seared as with a hot iron. They forbid people to marry and order them to abstain from certain foods. So there's this religious group who recognizes the power, the latent power of sex and sexuality. They recognize the destructive force that comes with it. And their solution is none of it. Don't talk about it. Don't do it. Don't even get married. But do you see the problem with their religion? The problem is anytime the ethical world gets a little tricky, anytime the waters get a little murky, anytime there's a tension between two things, they just go like, we're just going to avoid it. We will just completely avoid the topic. We will completely abandon the topic. Paul, he doesn't agree with their view. It's an angel view. He says this, I'm going to start at verse 3 again. They forbid people to marry and order them to abstain from certain foods which God created to be received with here we go, which God created to be received with thanksgiving by those who believe and who know the truth. Paul is saying, yes, it can be distorted, but it is also inherently good. He continues, for everything God created is good, and nothing is to be rejected if it is received with thanksgiving, because it is consecrated by the word of God in prayer. See, what Paul is saying here is, and this is why sex is about so much more, that's why this series is about so much more than sex. What Paul is pointing out is anytime there's something that has the potential to be tremendously harmful, tremendously destructive, tremendously, it just ruins things, it creates havoc, it wreaks havoc. Anytime there's something like that, the tendency is to forget that there's also inherent goodness to it. We see this in the way Christians handle the topic of alcohol. We see this in the way Christians handle the topic of sexuality. We could go on and on and on and on and on again. What it's saying is we manage the bad by completely obliterating it, by getting it out of our lives, by not dealing with the tension at all. And what Paul is saying is when you do that, you miss out. Because sexuality, marriage, relationships, he's saying it is good. God made it. It's his idea. But that's the way it goes, right? When there's tension. Whenever there's tension, two things that we have to hold in balance, tension that has to be managed, isn't the tendency to always go around it, not through it. And Paul is begging his readers, do not minimize this. If you do, you miss out. Rob Bell tells of an interview with a guy named Hugh Hefner. You might have heard of him. It was conducted at the Playboy Mansion. And they were surrounded, of course, by the artifacts of everything Hugh Hefner's accomplished. What the interview didn't know was Hugh Hefner's background, and I just want to read you a quote from Hugh Hefner himself. He says, our family was prohibitionist, Puritan in a very real sense, never hugged. Oh no, there was absolutely no hugging or kissing in my family. There was a point in time, though, when my mother later in life apologized to me for not being able to show affection. That was, of course, the way I'd been raised. I said to her, Mom, you couldn't have done it any better. And because of the things you weren't able to do, it set me on a course that changed my life and the world. There's an angel view of sexuality, and it suggests that it's dirty and that it's wrong. It notes the obvious, that it's destructive. But the irony is, when we just say it's bad, we can't deal with it, we can't talk about it, all we do is leave the door wide open for it to be exploited for evil. I think as a parent, that's your challenge. That's my challenge to myself and to you. It's easier to not talk about it. But is it also more destructive? It's easier to not allow it to be an ongoing conversation, even if you're disagreeing in how your child is actually living that out. But is it also more harmful? And then there's the opposite view. There's the animal view. If the angel view says a person is a spirit without a body, then the animal view says that a person is a body without a spirit. And in this view, sex and sexuality, it's nothing more than biology. It's nothing more than a physical act. It has no implications and ramifications for emotional health or spiritual health or health in general. Sex for them, there's no higher plane, no higher purpose. It's biology, period. Now in the book of Genesis, which is in Genesis 1, there's this ancient creation poem, and it's interesting because God creates people after he creates the animals. And in Genesis, when it starts to describe, okay, the animals have been made and then the people are then made by God, it says something very fascinating. Listen to this. And starting in verse 26, then God said, let us make human beings in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created the human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Now, this word image, we talk about it all the time. There's lots of different ways that you could describe what it means that people are made in God's image. But one of the things the author is clearly trying to do is say there is a distinct difference between animals and people. There's a distinct difference between the sexual act of two lions in the middle of nowhere and the sexual act of two humans. Why? Because humans have a spirit. There's more to them. Humans have more going on. It's why you'll never meet a horse who feels like his life is not going anywhere. Because it's different. Never meet a dog who's just kind of wondering what's next, where their life is going to end up. Because we're not animals. We're more. We have more than a body. We also have a spirit. And when we approach sexuality as people that have a body but no spirit, we approach sexuality like animals. No implications. And this is the very issue that Paul addresses in 1 Corinthians. In the ancient Greek culture, we're not new on the scene. It's just the same stuff recycled over and over again, right? And so this thinking of sexuality and the idea that like love has no consequences and sexual choices have no consequences, it was as prevalent then as it is today. And in the Greek culture, the way they would say it was this: the stomach for food and food for the stomach. And what they were saying is, when you desire food, that's a biological desire, so you go meet that need. And thus, the way they talked about sexuality was, well, when you desire sex, go find a prostitute. In their culture, go find a kid. I mean, there are lots of different options. It's a biological need. There's no shame to that. Go have it met. Paul engages them on this in 1 Corinthians 6. It's going to take me a minute to get there, so you get a head start. In 1 Corinthians 6, now this is a little tricky because what we try to do is put that slide up. In the italics, he's quoting them. So this would be easier if you're holding your Bible because you could see where the quotations originate. But he's quoting them as saying, I have the right to do anything, you say. And Paul says, but not everything is beneficial. I have the right to do anything, but I will not be mastered by anything, you say. For food for the stomach and the stomach for food, and God will destroy them both. The body, however, Paul says, is not meant for sexual immorality, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. See, Paul's saying, you say it's all biology, and what I want to suggest to you is you're more than an animal. You have a spirit. You're made for a higher purpose than to simply fulfill your biological desires. Those desires aren't bad. It's not bad to have them fulfilled, but you exist for more than feeding your physical hunger. He goes on. I don't know where I stopped. The body, however, is not meant for sexual morality, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. By his power, God, I was going to go down to 19, sorry. Do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have received from God? You are not your own. You were bought at a price. Therefore, honor God with your bodies. It's a bold statement Paul's making. In this culture, he's talking to Christ followers, but in this culture, they had the temple mindset far more than we do. They were everywhere. They were artifacts of Greco-Roman culture. What he's saying to them, they would have understood, because a temple is a holy place. A temple is a place where the gods lived. A temple is a place where heaven crashes into earth. And what he is saying is, you are more than a body. You're a temple of the Holy Spirit. You are not an animal. You have a spirit. You are not a spirit. You have a body. It's a both and, or maybe even a neither. One of the resources that I've been using and really loved was a book by Les Parrott, who is a psychiatrist and teaches at the academic graduate level. I always get confused whether it's Seattle Pacific or Pacific Lutheran, one of those schools in Seattle. And the book is called Crazy Good Sex. I love it, because it's counterintuitive, I think, in the way Christ followers think about sex. There's a, or at least the world thinks that we think about sex. The implications, his being a Christ follower, in my mind, are like he's going like, it's God's goal. He cites in there a study, I think he cites two actually, where they've studied sexual satisfaction among Americans. And what these studies have found conclusively, I mean, it just blows it out of the water, is that married monogamous couples' sexual satisfaction is exponentially higher than people who have, a variety of sexual partners over the course of weeks and months and years and a lifetime. What he says is that it's counterintuitive to the way we think, but by and large, a couple who's faithful to each other is far more sexually satisfied than is the person that we see on the movies, the single person that we see on the movies. And what the study further articulates is that the issue, though, is that's opposite of what we're told. Now, I'm not one to beg on Hollywood, and I'm guessing you're not either. But what the study points out is that what's portrayed through our media, through network television, through movies, through our music, is the exact opposite, isn't it? What we're told by them is it's the people who have dozens and hundreds of sexual partners, the people who don't tie themselves down, who aren't bored with the same old person, the same old body. They're the ones that are sexually satisfied. But as positive as the average married couple is in their sexuality, it's as unsatisfied as the average single person is. And I'm not suggesting everyone who's single is promiscuous, but you know what I mean, right? I wonder if that's because sex is about more. That God understands it a little bit more, that we're not just angels and we're not animals. I wonder if God's desire really is great sex. And he has a plan. And he has a purpose. And it starts by going, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Sex is about more. It's about more because you are not a spirit. You have sexual desires, and God made you that way. And he has incredible plans for fulfilling those desires. It's about more because you are not an animal. You are way more than a physical being. You're made for way more than that. I think where it starts is by asking the question, how are you approaching sexuality? Do you have an angel-like approach? This isn't a married single question. It's not an age question. This is relevant across the board. Do you approach sexuality like an angel? Is it dirty? Is it shameful? Do you avoid the topic altogether? And you know what? We all know this, but it's hard to see it in the mirror. The problem is none of us really have an angel view. Because when we claim we have an angel view, that just opens wide the door for all the sexual deviation, does it not? I'll bet you if you're someone that has an angel view, I'll bet you also have some brokenness. Whether it's unstated fantasies, whether it's a thought life that's out of control, whether it's an online addiction, it doesn't work. Do you approach sexuality like an animal? Like it has no side effects, no translation to your life, to your spiritual health, to your emotional health. And I guess the only question that comes to mind, if that's your approach, and let's be honest, we're all prone to it, but is like, how's that working for you? Like, are you more or less complete? Do you feel more or less whole? More or less fulfilled because of that bent? I'm not trying to put a finger in anybody's chest, and I'm certainly not the expert on this. I'm just trying to provoke and initiate a conversation that I think our culture avoids. And I think Christ says, like, be better. Go there. What if sex is about way more than we typically are willing to admit? And if in fact it is, I think the next place we have to go is, I think we have to have a conversation about coveting, about lust, about the idea that lust promises what it can never deliver. And even when I say that, you can see like that's not a sexual question. Like that's a life question. That's a human question. That's a brokenness question. And that's where we're going to go next week.
For more information on Narrate Church, visit www.narratechurch.org or download the mobile app, now available for iPhone and Android.